Well, I'm excited today because I get to meet a new friend, Mike Janzen. Really excited, man, to have you on the Beyond Sunday podcast and just to talk shop, talk music, talk life. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this is it's great to connect with you today, and we're getting a little bit of snow here. I'm in Toronto, Canada, so we're getting a little bit of
Okay.
snow in the background, falling down, but it's I'm warm. I'm warm where I am.
That's good that you're warm. We're sort of in opposite climates. You know, you being in Toronto, me being in Orlando. I think the high today is like 77 down here. But it's not super sunny. It's kind of a little bit overcast, but it's still pretty nice. I actually kind of I'm from the Northeast, you know, Pennsylvania, and I miss the snow a little bit. But I only want to experience the snow for like a couple hours, maybe a full day, and then I'm like I'm good, you know.
I
So
know. You live in paradise there, and it's I yeah, we're gonna have to plan a family trip down there again very soon.
yes, yes, for sure. So Mike, it's great to just be able to connect and have been loving your music as of late. Um, I want to go back. Actually, let's do this before we talk the obvious. You're a musician, you're an artist, you're a songwriter. Um, what do you what do you love to talk about, or what could you talk about for hours that maybe most people wouldn't know about you, or what could you start a podcast on outside of music?
Yeah, I probably it could be one of two things. I love analyzing and talking about weather and weather patterns. I don't feel like I'm that good at it yet, but I just love like sky watching and cloud watching.
Really?
Yeah, so I like to like
You're like my son. He's 11, but ever since he was a little kid, he's had this connection to the. He just loves weather, and we're always like, "Man, you should do something as a career, like something with weather." And he's always like, "No, I don't want to do that," but he loves it.
yeah, I mean it'd be either that or like a Lonely Planet kind of guide, interactive guide, something like with traveling. I love like going on hikes and trails and adventures kind of thing. So
Yes.
with that, I would be pretty excited. I always thought maybe my second career would be working for National Geographic or something as a photographer, but I'm not that good, and I'm happy where I am. But
Yes.
might be two things.
So do you have? I don't know where you've hiked, but do you sort of have like a top hike in Canada or in around the world that's just top of your mind? Like this was breathtaking.
Yeah, there's we live in Toronto here, and just Michigan and just north of there's an area called Lake Superior Provincial Park that is just some of the craziest 8 hours of driving and hikes all along the highway. There's like waterfalls falling and rocks plunging into the lake, and the lake waters are completely crystal clear.
Hmm.
So I would say there's one there. It's called Nays, which is Neys, and it's super cool. Like you have to walk sort of through this abandoned beach, and then up some cliffs, and then you end up on this rock plateau where there's little rock pools everywhere where there's tadpoles to catch and stuff for the kids. But it's just stunning. So right now that might be my favorite.
That I don't know if we've been there. So as I mentioned before the call, we traveled all over the country and did lots of hikes, but I don't recall that one. I have to go back and hit that one. I think one of my most memorable hikes. I don't know if you've ever been to Zion National Park in Utah, um,
No, not yet.
but they have so it's Angel's Landing, which is a pretty. I think it's probably a top 10 hike in the U.S. at least. Um, and it's just breathtaking, kind of dangerous. So you walk a couple miles, up these switchbacks, and then you're sort of on this like cliff basically, and there are steep drop offs, just massive cliffs that you're sort of navigating, and there's like a chain that you have to hold on to.
Yeah, yeah.
Super dangerous. I mean, people die there, I think, every year. But it was just like the rush of that, like this is sort of a life threatening hike, and I'm kind of loving it. I didn't take my kids; I just did it by myself. Super fun.
Yeah,
So
there's nothing like that. Like, yeah, especially if your kids aren't with you. If you can, I took a trip with my friend who's a musician, guitar player, up by Banff National
Yep.
Park in Canada, and we did a whole bunch of different like mountain hikes. And yeah, one we started off, and within 5 minutes we lost the trail. We sort of figured like we were looking up and we could see the top of the mountain, so we sort of figured like we just have to get there. So we just all day spent bushwhacking through the forest, trying to get to the top of the mountain. It didn't end that well, but it was pretty amazing. It was pretty great.
Oh man, that sounds like a lot of work.
It was some work. Yeah.
um, Mike, let's talk music. So, when did music, um, your love for music begin? When did that? When did you feel like you sort of connected with music in a very real way? How old were you? Where were you?
Yeah, I was 4 years old when my parents were at a missionary school in India called Woodstock. And at that school, as a 4 year old, for some reason they gave me a violin. That's usually a mistake to give a violin to a 4 year old because it's not going to sound that good, and I'm sure it didn't. Um, but I started playing violin there, and I don't remember loving that instrument particularly. But when I got to grade three, I remember a lot of pop radio sort of had a lot of keys in it when I was growing up. So there's lots of like Billy Joel, Keith Green, Michael W was probably hitting it back then. So
Yeah.
there's all these like sort of keyboard was king for a bit, and I really resonated somehow with what I can do this. I can like go to a piano and figure all these songs out. So I started taking piano lessons and started making up my own stuff. My piano teacher would always be like, can you like play the Beethoven version now? Because like, you're just making up notes. So I love to like make things up always as a kid.
Traditional piano teachers hate that.
Yeah, no. And she was a great teacher. It's just I really like, I tended to wander. So yeah, as a growing up as a teen, I remember we started our first band somewhere I think in grade 11, and I wrote my first song somewhere in there. I was at a camp and I wrote a theme song for the camp, and that was a riot. And then I sort of, yeah, I just sort of loved it. I didn't really think I would be a lead singer ever. Like I remember saying one thing I'm never going to do is be a lead vocalist in a band, but it ended up like 5-10 years later I was doing a lot of that. So it was sort of cool. I felt just I love doing it. Like on my spare time, people would all be going out in college. We're gonna go bowling, or we're gonna go at this coffee shop. We're gonna do something, and I always just would find an excuse to stay back and write songs. So I just love
Mm.
doing it, and it seemed to sort of suit who God made me to be. And yeah, anyway, the rest is history.
So you basically kind of loved music right away. So like at 4 years old, you remember like I'm all because for me, I was 7 years old and they signed me up for piano lessons. They're like, you're doing this. And I was like, no, I'm not. They're like, you're doing this. And I kind of hated it for a while, right? Because it wasn't the cool thing to do. It was like I was really into sports, playing baseball, playing basketball. I don't want to play the piano, go to like that's lame. But eventually just sort of developed like a love for it when I saw somebody do a concert once where they made a piano sound like something I never knew it could sound like. But for you, it was just like you sort of connected to it that early, huh?
Well, I would say I did not like violin
Yeah.
practicing, and I do feel like my parents had to force me to practice and go to lessons. So I think it was when I felt like I had the power to choose something, right? Like when I
Yes.
started piano, I felt like it was my decision. Um, I don't know if they would say it was, but but yeah, I there was something about it then that I just loved. Now I didn't love practicing um, throughout, right to the end of high school, and
Mm.
I didn't think I would necessarily go into music until maybe end of grade 12. Both my parents were teachers, and so they strongly probably thought if you're in music, you're a teacher. Whereas I sort of always had this dream, like, you see a great band play, right? or sometimes I'd hear a great score on a movie, and I want to do that so badly. Like, I want to write for Disney, or I want to
Yeah.
write for this, or I want to, like, I had that in me all the time. But it didn't really seem like it was possible until, I went to Bible college for a couple years. And on the second year, um, I just suddenly felt like, you know what? I'm going for this. I love this, and I'm not really good at anything else.
Mm.
And I think I need to go into music. So, I didn't know what I would be doing 10 years later. But I did know I love music, and so, yeah, yeah.
So talk to me about something you said earlier with, um, so you were in piano lessons, and when you take piano lessons, and I'm pro lessons, absolutely. Um, but I feel like the best musicians, go beyond just playing what somebody else has written and developed to sort of taking that inspiration and creating themselves, right? And I was always that way. I was classically trained. I went to college and did all the classical music, right? And it never was something I loved, but I knew people that loved it, where they would just sit and could play like Bach and Beethoven and Debussy and all this stuff. Like, they absolutely loved it. I always leaned towards just sitting down at the piano and just sort of interpreting the moment and just playing and improvising and creating. Like, that is just who I was. Talk about that tension, or how do you develop that? Or is it just some people kind of lean a little bit more creative than others? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am a huge believer that lessons and, like, training can really help you. Um, I think there's a stage of life, especially after you get out of high school, where you just need to be like a sponge and learn and absorb,
Yeah.
right? Like, I've done a lot of jazz playing in my life as well, and it's a whole art form that requires a whole bunch of absorbing, right? You can't just sort of get up on the piano and start playing, because every song and every solo that you play has a chord structure underneath. And so you need to know each chord and what notes might work over that chord, right?
Yeah.
So, that can take sort of years to develop. And often people would come up to me after a jazz concert or a solo I threw into a normal concert, and they'd be like, "What? Like, you're just making it up, right?" I was making it up. I said, "Yes, but, like, it's years of learning, lifting other people's chords and solos, listening to sort of every decade of jazz.
Yep.
And then once you learn and you sort of have all these great influences, then I think you can use that as a springboard to do whatever." And they always say in jazz, that's your time to forget. Like, forget everything you learned, just start playing. And
Yep.
so I think the truth might be in the middle for me, where, I'm a total in the moment guy. I love just responding, to moments. I love sometimes playing for funerals, which sounds really odd, but because I get to just sort of play a hymn and make up an arrangement on the spot often, because I don't always have the time to practice. So, I love responding. I work with an actor, and I just have to, like, improvise underneath his acting and his script, and I love that. So I'm a real in the moment guy. I'm not that great at, like, nailing something the same 10 times in a row. But it's all a lot of the training. I went to school for 7 years, 6, 7 years of music training. So there's a lot of, like, learning that went involved before I could actually say, okay, now I'm just improvising.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think in worship leading too, right? There's a lot possible with spontaneous stuff and having options at your fingertips with chords, with lines, with different notes in the chords. There's a lot possible there for learning and growing and improvising.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lesson there that if you're great at improv, you're not just kind of pulling it out of thin air. You have to know the rules to know when you can break the rules, and you have to have practiced and practiced to kind of know how to go off script in an effective way, You know, isn't there that I don't know the name of the comedian, but I remember he was kind of, maybe you even know his name. I have no idea. I'll have to look it up. But basically, one of his routines was like jazz, like anybody can play jazz, you
Yeah.
know. And so he's just has a piano there, and he just starts. There's a drummer, you know, putting this beat down, and he's just smacking the piano basically, and it actually sounds pretty good, right? Because it could you can get away with it a little bit, right? Because so on the jazz idea, so I've never been very good at jazz. Like I never really studied jazz. I can fake it, you know, with a couple like, you know, major seven chords or something, you know, like, ooh, that sounds jazzy. But for somebody who wants to get really good at jazz, what would be sort of like a recommended, like, hey, do this for the next year to become a really good jazz pianist?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's there's so many great things on YouTube these days, right? Like when I was sort of cutting my teeth in jazz, a lot of what we did was we listened to records or recordings and played along, and sometimes wrote down their entire solos, with a pencil. So
Mm,
now probably AI can do that for you probably now. But I would say, listening to really great artists that you enjoy and that you like the sounds they're coming up with, I think that is a great starting point. And then some of those guys, like I love, there's a keyboard guy who's used to be with a band called Snarky Puppy. He's called Corey Henry, and he's like funky keyboard player, and I sort of like that mix of jazz with funk or blues, like sort of in the middle there, because it feels like it's a little more accessible to more people. But Corey Henry has a whole series, on YouTube or that you can order that just sort of starts working through jazz. So I might actually do some research online to find some good tools that way. Again, for me, like we listened and we went to the bookstore of all things, not Amazon, but actually the bookstore, and look for books, right? Like jazz study books. And then we'd take those
mm,
home, voicing books. And there's some great resources there, but I'm guessing a lot of them are online by now. Um, yeah. So I would sort of search for people you really love to listen to, and maybe even start writing out some of what they're playing. See if you can write it out.
yep.
And that's really cool. If you can, I used to have stacks of paper in my house of just written out solos. Sometimes I do, maybe the first 16 measures of a Harry Connick solo or something, or an Oscar Peterson thing. And then I just practice it in all the keys, all 12 keys, and see if I could replicate the style, the swing, you know,
Amazing.
and get it in all the keys so that no matter what song you're playing, you would have that under your fingers.
Yeah. I love that. I did that too, like as a worship leader, you know, I used to just kind of copy my heroes, you know, the musicians and people that I looked up to, you know, and I think that kind of develops something in you when you study just what somebody else is doing and try to like break it down, you know. I used to try to just figure out what the key was that I was hearing instead of just looking it up, like what key is this in, to try to figure it out myself, you know.
Right.
And I think just having like challenges for yourself, I think are huge. I want to put you on the spot, so um, give us like a chord progression, right? Like I don't know if it's like a favorite chord progression or something like that we should try, like just to go to the piano and like play a jazzy progression. Do you got a favorite?
Yeah, for jazz, the most simple progression. When I first started playing jazz, someone said, "Oh man, yeah, jazz is all about two fives." I'm like, two fives, yeah, two fives. So I walked away from that conversation, nodding but not knowing really at all what they were saying. But yeah, I mean, the most basic jazz progression is 2-5-1. So like whatever key you're in, let's say you're in C major, that's the one key. Then
Mm-hmm.
the two chord, which is always minor, would be D minor, and the five chord would be G7.
Mm-hmm.
And jazz often puts seven sevenths on every chord, so it's good to sort of get used to that. But yeah, I would take
So it's D. So it's D minor seven, G7,
and then C major seven.
C major seven. I already feel that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that.
and I would take that that kind of a thing and take it into every key, going on your cycle of fifths. So, you have D minor 7, G7, C major 7,
Hmm.
and that goes to C. Now you want to go to F. So you go G minor 7, which is the second of F,
Okay.
to C7, which is the fifth of F, to
We're
F.
stretching people today. We're going to school today. I like this.
But yeah, two fives. Anyway, and unfortunately, the other thing you need to know about those progressions is it's good for the brain just to do what we just talked about, but it's good if you have a nice voicing too,
Yeah.
because then you can practice how it sounds, where it's not just stacked thirds, but it's spaced out nicely. And jazz is also
Yes.
spacing. So I don't
Voicing is key.
if I can like describe the voicing on the podcast, but anyway, maybe I should just leave
Well,
it.
no, it's good. I think like you want to find like common tones, right?
Yeah,
I feel like between chords. So sometimes it's the least amount of movement just feels right,
exactly.
rather than just the like root position, you know, jumping around.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite key to play in?
I don't. I can actually say I don't.
Really?
I actually am a kind of guy that I actually avoid certain keys once I start playing in them too much. So you know, obviously, like guitar land, E is your favorite key. In jazz land, often, it's the flat keys. So it would be like B flat, I guess F, B flat, E flat, A flat would be the most common.
Why? Why are those the jazz keys?
I don't know totally. Some of it's transposition with horns and
Mm,
how it transposes. Sharp
makes
keys
sense.
on horns. So often, in a jazz setting, you're gonna have piano, bass, drums, or guitar, and then a horn or two, right? And they're often B flat instruments, so they transpose better into flats than to sharps.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that's completely accurate, but
Yeah.
and yeah, in pop and worship circles, sharps classical for sure. Like you go more. It's just different rules for different styles.
Yeah. So you personally tell me about like your favorite like instrument to play? Like, is it a certain, grand piano that you have or upright piano or a certain keyboard or certain, software patch? Give us like, what's your just go to, this is me. I love this.
I like this. This is fun.
We're going deep. We're nerding out over this stuff.
This is what I can talk about for hours. This is great. Um, there's a few different pianos. I find that each kind of piano has every now and then you get a gem, but it's not right across the board. So like the piano I have in my studio is a C7 Yamaha, and that would
Hmm.
be my go-to. I have a bit of a deal with Yamaha, so that's convenient. But also C7s, they're just always pretty good. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you get to a church or a venue and there's a C7, you're like, I'm gonna have a good night.
Yeah.
If there's a Steinway, you might have a great night, but the action is different than a Yamaha. So if the Steinway is not in good condition and maintained, you might have a bad night.
Mm.
And and then there's other ones, Busendorfers, other ones. My favorite piano in Toronto isn't my own my piano, but it's the one in a studio. It's called a Fazioli. It's an
Heard
Italian
of this.
piano, and the tone on this thing is just gorgeous. I mean, I could play that thing until my back gave out. So at least 5 minutes. I could play that piano. It just has like some pianos have both the warmth, but also the cutting clarity up top when you're really soloing.
Yeah.
And it's rare to get a piano that much tone and also that clear when you're doing jazz. So I'm gonna pick that one for now. But
Mm.
and then like patch wise, I've been doing a lot of stuff online in felted piano world, which is sort of like neoclassical piano.
Yeah, I love it.
On Spotify, it'd be like peaceful piano or something like that, or it's like more relaxed piano. A few years ago, I've always written a ton of piano music, but my friend phoned me up and he said, you could do really well on Spotify. And I'm like, no, I can't. And he's like, no, like if you just change the length of your song, the tone of your piano, and a few other things probably, then you could do pretty well. And so, and simplify, right? He told me to simplify. So I sort of tried it, and so I used there's some great like Spitfire plugins.
Yeah.
One's like free. It's just Spitfire. It's just their sort of soft piano. It's called.
Yeah.
It wins all the shootouts online against all the really big name $400-500 plugins. So that's my favorite sort of go to for like soft piano.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like in this, I don't know if this is just like a seasonal thing, but like for me, a piano just has to sound really good, soft, you know? Like if I go to acoustic piano, I get that soft pedal down and just like, how's it feel soft? And like, yeah, the more like muted and felty the piano is, that's when I feel like I just love it, you know? So maybe it's my age as I'm getting older, like I'm getting less like high energy, like loud kind of, it's just more just simple and, just the vibe of the felt and everything is amazing.
I think you're right. It's there's something really beautiful about it, and it does work like it is sort of soundtracky too. Like it creates a vibe. Just hitting a normal piano with that soft pedal down or the felt down on an upright creates like a beautiful, beautiful texture that's really usable in both like modern pop music and cinematic or TV kind of stuff. So yeah.
What's your we'll move on to some of your music here in a second too, but I'm enjoying this. What would you say is kind of like your favorite MIDI controller or keyboard, right? That can be sort of hit or miss in terms of the feel. Most people are using Nords these days, but do you have like a certain, controller that is your go-to?
Not really. Like I have been a Yamaha guy most of my life. So, in my studio, I have, like the 88 weighted Yamaha keyboard, and I probably have almost every variation that they've put out in the last 20 years. Most of them are on rental to friends who are taking piano lessons and want a keyboard.
Yeah.
Well, I've stored up a lot of those. And what I love about those is I do feel like there's a combination with the Yamaha stuff that the touch of it and what you get back feels quite similar to a Yamaha piano to me, so that it's an easy transfer, and I feel it's really easy to play, and it sounds good plugged in. I also have a Roland, what is it? It is.
It's right there.
80. It's right there. FP8.
That thing looks like a tank. It's big.
These are tanks. It's just they get heavier the older they get, but so yeah, I like because I'm a piano player and keyboard guy. I really like having something with weight to it, weighted keys, and usually that just means it's going to be heavier, right? But I love the FP80, but like Roland sounds don't always have the depth to them, and
Right.
I love it when I'm just playing in the studio. It's actually quite beautiful and actually feels really good. But as soon as you plug it in, I'm at the stage right now where I'm, going to be looking elsewhere probably because it doesn't have that extra gear plugged in that the Yamaha does.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll probably be going. I've been trying out a bunch of Nords recently, and there's a reason they're everywhere, and I probably will be heading that direction shortly.
I feel like every church in America has a Nord right now, and nobody really knows how to use it. Because there's like, I mean, you could probably control, like operate an aircraft from that thing. There's so many like knobs and buttons and like things that it can do. And most people just, what's the easiest piano patch and maybe a little pad under there, like we need the Nord experts to rise up, show us how to use this thing.
Oh, man. Yeah, I looked at a Nord a few months back, and I brought someone with me, who's a little younger, and it was so funny because like I thought it was going to be totally, make sense to play it and to get the patches and to like change things. Oh my goodness, I was, it was just I could get the main sound up barely, but you had to mute other things to get the main sound up, right? And
Right.
so it's tricky. I've sort of caught on to it now, and I realize like Obviously, Yamaha has a version like that that our church just bought. That was a little more affordable for us, but yeah, it's you got to have a degree for that for sure.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I'm loving your music, man, and you know, the first thing that strikes me, I was just listening this morning to your new songs from the Canyon Psalms project, and um, diversity.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know, like you really weave a lot of different genres. You know, from the obvious jazz to like gospel and CCM and classical, like it's like all in there, which is like super impressive. Like how do you do that? And like before we maybe dive into this particular project, just talk to us a little bit about your creative process, how you approach your sound, how you develop that, what you're sort of going after. Take us into the behind the scenes a little bit.
yeah. It's not always intentional. I probably love a lot of music, and I'm
Yeah.
influenced by a lot of music. I always describe myself as a pretty messed up musician in that I did my master's in composing, which is quite classical, really.
Yeah.
I was writing like string quartets and orchestra pieces for that. That didn't always sound very tonal or very good. But I got all that training, so there's a lot of classical, and then I fell in love with jazz early in sort of high school era, and as soon as I got my degree in composing, I just started playing jazz constantly because I was like, you know what, I could be out there every night just playing and making stuff up instead of in my room for 6 months writing a piece. So I started playing a ton of jazz, and so that was in there. And then I was also in a pop band called the Penny Merchants for like about 15 years. Um, so we, did a ton of stuff and a lot of experience there too. So, and all of those things felt like home. Like they all felt sort of comfortable to me after enough years.
Yeah.
And so like, as musicians, we're influenced by so much stuff. And I always say to younger musicians, like, pay attention to sort of what's in you and what you love. Pay attention to some of the diversity in you and what's unique about you that you bring to the table that you maybe don't even hear in other music. And then, slowly keep working on that and work on your craft. And one day, things just sort of come together as you're true to who God sort of put you to be.
Yeah.
For me, that day came, I was hired to be a orchestrator for a show, and I had my degree in that. So I thought, this is going to be easy. Like I got my training in this. So I landed the job, but as I started doing it, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I started writing and I was like, I don't know where to begin. And so over 6 months,
This was like a live show.
it's a live show, a live orchestra
Yeah.
show that I was supposed to orchestrate. And so slowly, day by day, I just listened to all the greats, slowly absorbed it. And over 6, 8 months, eventually it got easier. Um, and, and so I ended up getting hired as a piano player in a band to orchestrate a show, but I was mainly the piano player. But it was sort of like a folk pop kind of setting. And so I remember being on stage one night and I'm having people play my orchestra arrangements. I was sort of trying to rip out a jazz solo over top of this folk music. And I was playing pop sort of folk. And all those worlds sort of collided in this concert hall. And I was like, oh, because people always told me when I was younger, they said, focus on one thing.
Yeah.
You're never going to go anywhere. You've got too much going on. Focus on one thing. It's too diverse. No one's going to listen. And so, there is something to be said for channeling yourself, of course, right? But yeah, I think sometimes that diversity can also give us something that's distinct, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
as we just go after it for a while, and we don't always know where it's going to land up. But yeah, I do like a lot of different music, and I tend to listen to a lot of different music. And when I start writing a song, I'm fairly open to where that might go. And and if it's, I love when music takes on what the song is about.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to develop piano parts that also reflect the lyrics just as much as the lyrics do, maybe.
Yeah. Does the arranging and music come easier for you than like lyrics do?
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. I think I'm enjoying lyric writing more and more as I get older. I love the challenge of tweaking every little thing and tightening things up to really say something. Um, but music comes really quick usually for me. And usually it's the process is usually a 3 or 4 day affair where first day I'll start playing something and I don't get that far always. It's either magic or there's nothing there. And then the next day it seems to come a little easier. And then the third day it starts flowing. So for me, it's usually it takes a few days, no matter what I'm working on, just to sort of shift gears and get the juices flowing. And it is a great discipline to be, working on writing every day, right? Because it
Yeah.
just keeps that the creativity coming, I think.
Yeah. Um, I talked to an artist once, and they said so. Basically, they said they release everything they create. Right? They weren't really prolific. Right? It was like, I made this. I'm gonna just tweak it, and I'm gonna release it. You know. Whereas there's other artists that just have like, hard drives full of stuff that nobody's ever gonna hear. Right? And they just release kind of what they feel is the best.
Yeah.
What's your creative process like? Are you like, you have so much music written and created over the years, it's not all going to see the light of day, or do you sort of release most of what you sit down to work on?
Yeah, I have a ton of stuff that's not very good. I think that just gets buried. Um, I tend to write a lot,
Yeah.
and the stuff that's good passes the weekend test, which is, if I'm working on stuff in the studio, maybe I'm gigging on the weekend, or I take off on the weekend, and then I come back Monday, and if I listen to it and I'm like, oh, I like that, that's the test. But often, 8 out of 10 times, it's sort of like, nah, 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 you know. And I don't know. I actually admire people who can just write something and release it. Like they don't have this long catalog of discarded songs that I do, but and often some people are just really good actually at identifying instantly that they like it. And I
Yeah.
think it just takes me a little more time. I'm a guy of options. I love having options. So when I write a song, I'll probably have 5 or 6 or 10 different verse options when I'm writing it. Um, just to sort of try things. I like to try it and see, do I like that? Do I want to sing that? Do I want to sing
Hmm.
that 10 times, or do I want to just sing it once? Um, so yeah, I tend to inspiration does hit. So sometimes a song is done in a few hours, but often, I take a lot longer just to sort of tweak things and try different choruses or whatever.
Yeah. Love that. So Mike, take us into this Psalms project. Um, so recently you've released volume 3, which means there's a volume 2 and there's a volume 1. So this is a series that you've been in, the Psalms project. Um, why did you start this, and what's kind of your inspiration behind diving into the Psalms?
Yeah, a number of years ago, a friend of mine, we were going out for sushi, and he just asked me, he said, like, have you ever considered doing an album on the Psalms? And, I sort of thought about it, but my life was pretty full in those days. So I said, yeah, that sounds great. But secretly, I was like, that's probably not going to happen for a few years. Um, but it sounded like a good idea. Like he was saying the Psalms were something really important for us, really important for culture in this day. And so, anyway, I sort of just tabled that. And a few weeks later, I was getting up in the middle of the night. I had some stomach problems, and I took a few sips of water, and I passed out and I tumbled face first into our basement tile floor, and 10 seconds later my wife was at my side and she said, "Hey, are you okay? Like what happened?" I'm like, I have no idea what happened, and I stumbled back to bed, But the next day when I woke up, like everything was very blurry when I looked outside, and my computer screen was
Wow.
weird, and noise in our house was strange. Like it just felt weird. I'd never really felt that before. So I phoned up a friend who had had a concussion, and she said, "Yeah, yeah, you hit your head. Yeah, you've got a concussion. Those are all the symptoms." So um, I asked her, like, "Are we talking days here, or like when can I get back to normal?" And she said, "Oh, probably like at the most a week or two." And I thought, no, 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 no. I got gigs coming up. I cannot do a week or two like just sitting here. So that began a process of not just a couple weeks, but like by week 4, I was feeling terrible. I couldn't walk down the street straight. I was so dizzy. I was nauseous all the time. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't look at anything. I couldn't go outside. So this began, a season of darkness where I just was really in the dark, a lot of the day,
Wow.
and often in sort of solitary confinement where I had to be by myself. I couldn't talk to people. That got me dizzy and it just felt bad. So, what do you do when you're sort of stuck, right? Stuck on a couch a lot of the day, and I turned to the Psalms. Um, I thought, well, maybe I have time for the Psalms now. So I pulled out my phone. I couldn't look at screens much in those days, so I'd pull out my phone and just half glance at a verse or two in the Psalms, and then just try to like breathe in and out with those words. That helped calm
Wow.
my head too, because I was, getting dizzy all the time. And one of the first ones was Psalm 42, which was, "By day the Lord directs his love, and at night his song is with me." And I would just over and over be saying those words in my head. And slowly melodies would start forming and coming. And so the first 2 volumes of Psalms over the next 3 years were written just by, having my iPhone out. And every day I had a few good minutes where I felt good. So I would use those and sing little melodies in, go through a new psalm every couple days and just see what came out. And then slowly, as I felt better, I brought friends into the equation and said, "Does this resonate with you? Is it terrible? Is it any good?" And so I'd sort of weed through some of these pieces and and see if they passed the litmus test. And then, yeah, as I felt better and better, eventually I recorded them during the pandemic, which was a fun time to record because like you can get anybody. Nobody was touring. I've always loved Abby Parker from I Am They, her voice. So I talked to her. She sang on a bunch of stuff on the first 2 albums.
Nice.
And so it was great. It was great that way. And suddenly when the Psalms project came out, right when it was released, the whole world was in isolation, right? Whether they wanted to be or not, they were sort of stuck in these islands, right? And so the music, I think, of the Psalms in general, just it sort of resonated with people. And then the next album, I was feeling a lot better. And the third album that just came out was a few songs that I just didn't know what to do with. They were more upbeat, not so gentle and meditative. And so I phoned up my friend who's a producer and just said, "Hey, like I got these songs. I don't know if they're any good. I don't think they are, but do you want to just listen to them and tell me honestly?" And so he got back to me instantly and said, like, "These are some of my favorite songs you've written. Let me produce it." And I was like, "Oh,
That's awesome.
you like these?" So
Don't we need those people in our life though? Like I think that is so key to have somebody, sort of an outside person that can just say, "Yeah, this is great," like cuz I struggle to believe in anything that I make. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, I was quite shocked, and but he heard like some of them were quite big and muscular and cinematic, and he heard all these layers and textures and synths, and like he just heard it, and I wasn't sure what to do with it because my previous albums were like strings. I love strings, so they had strings, piano, a little more typical of something that's gentle and meditative, and so he started putting all this stuff on the songs, and then I started writing some new ones because I love gospel music. That's my happy spot in life. So he started producing all these tracks and putting layers on it. And yeah, so the result is quite an eclectic, diverse cinematic album.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. And I love diving into the Psalms, you know, because I think the Psalms sort of give you the range of human emotion. You have absolute, you know, ecstasy and celebration, and then but absolute despair too, you know. And I think that is just reflective of life, you know. Like there are the mountaintop praise God for what He has done, but also, hey, I'm not doing well right now. Like God, you know, destroy my enemies, you know, break the teeth of the wicked, like, you know, pull me out of this pit, you know. And so I think it's just very reflective of what our daily experience is like, and sort of teaching us to press into God in the midst of it, you know. So
Yeah, and I think, you know, piggybacking on that, I think like the Psalms are full of lament, right? They're full of,
yeah,
I think over 1/3 of the Psalms are lament. And this was the ancient Jewish songbook that they sang. Like they sang when they were walking, when they were being led away in exile, when Jesus was on the cross, he was saying those words from Psalm 22, right? My God, why have you forsaken me, right?
yeah,
And there's this whole history of singing lament and singing the heart emotions. And I think if the church can recapture the essence of that, not do away with what is amazing about the songs we have, but incorporate laments, right? So that when people come into the world and they feel, looking around them in their homes, in their families, in the wars in the world, like they see brokenness, right? They see deep brokenness, and there's anger over that, and there is despair, like you said. And to be able to come to church and somehow figure out how to sing that, it's
yeah,
I think what it will do is it'll be the key that unlocks worship for some people.
yeah,
And I think, like you said, it'll describe people's emotions, and that somehow a deep trust will be, you know, created in realizing, oh, right, God can take it, right? Whatever we can get back to him, he can take it. And it's actually for our benefit to get all these emotions and feelings and disappointments and anxieties out to God.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you're totally right.
Well, yeah, I think we can get sort of one-sided in church, you know, at least, you know, in the tradition I grew up in, which I'm so grateful for. But it was very celebratory and declarative and faith-based, and you know, let's declare, you know, the goodness of God, and that's wonderful, you know. But it wasn't until I really walked through a similar kind of physical challenge personally that I just had no language for that experience. You know, I didn't have a paradigm for like suffering.
Yeah.
And because my paradigm for suffering was, what did I do wrong where God is not happy with me? You know what I mean? And that's just not always the case. You know, there's just life that happens, and we see that in the scriptures. We see that obviously in the Psalms, where it's like we just press into God, and he's faithful, and he's there no matter what is going on, you know? So I'm grateful for music like this that kind of helps us, reminds us, right, of God's faithfulness in the midst of it all. Mike, this has been really fun. I've already kind of had you on here for like an hour. I probably honestly could just keep going, just kind of talking shop and everything, but we'll leave it at that. Maybe we'll do another round some other time. But anything you want to let our listeners know about, maybe that aren't familiar with you? Obviously, I want to encourage people to go to, you know, Apple Music and Spotify, or, you know, wherever to listen to your music. But is there anything you want to let them know about, how they can sort of connect with you or see what you're up to or anything like that?
Yeah, you can check out my website's probably the safest at, you know, www.mikejanzen.ca, and Jansen is with a Z. That's probably the easiest place to.
So it's Jansen, not Janzen.
Right, but you can, you know, whatever. I don't mind. You can make any way up. I'll answer to anything.
Similar.
Similar. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you can check it out there. I'm on all the usual streaming places, so it's always amazing when people connect that way. And I'm on Instagram too, YouTube. There's some cool videos that I put out the last few months on the videos, so that's great if you want to check that out with the gospel choir. And yeah, no, it's great. I'm learning a lot about how to connect online. People don't buy artifacts like CDs much anymore, so there's lots of cool ways online to connect.
Do you still have CDs?
I still press CDs,
Yeah.
but I'm hesitant as to how many I press. I
Yeah, that's hard.
got to be careful. I have a lot in my attic right now that are just sort of staying there. So,
Yeah. Well, Mike, great to meet you, man, and thank you. Thanks for your time today.
hey, this is great. It felt like about 5 minutes passed. So thanks for the great
That's a
conversation.
good thing, right? That's a good sign,
Very good.
you know?
It's a good
Yeah.
something again. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we'll for sure do it again. Yeah, man, music is, I mean, it's just tough to know when you're like kind of are you on a label, or are you kind of an independent artist?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard to know. I think it depends on how much, like in terms of CDs, like if you gig a lot
Yeah.
and you're touring a lot and traveling a lot, I think that makes a lot of sense. But
Helps then.
you
Yeah.
know, if you're not, like if you're just, creating music and releasing it, streaming's the way to go. Cause I don't know if people are buying CDs, like I remember when I put out a record right out of college, it was like CD Baby. Do you remember CD Baby?
Yeah.
I don't even know if they're still a thing. That's what I did. They took care of all the, getting it to iTunes and everything. And then I sent them 100 CDs or whatever. And, it's just,
the email back, recently saying, we've overstocked your CD. If you pay
right.
$55, we'll send them back to you.
Right. Exactly. So anyway, man, I'm rambling. Good to meet you. Yeah, man, love to do this again sometime. And hey, let me know if there's anything that you need as you do what you do, and anything I can help with, let me know.